I've got the physical capacities of a, whatever year that'll be, and then you realize very quickly, like, no, not at all. So welcome. So today we are continuing this line of inquiry on this third point of, or point 3 of the mind training slogan. So for the last 6 classes, we've been working on this idea of basically when the world the slogan is long, when the world is full of evil, transform all obstacles into the path of wisdom. And we've been playing with this concept of recognizing the interdependence and impermanence of all things as a way to understand how when we experience obstacles on a path towards accomplishment, whether that be a kind of spiritual wisdom or professional or personal or however we describe it, we have this tendency to really sort of look at the world and its obstacles in terms of this externality. Right? And also in terms of somehow a kind of spontaneous, like self-generating arising. And what I mean by that is that we somehow think that everything out there somehow came into being out of nothing. Instead, we look at this idea of everything is codependent and co-arising, which means that there is no such thing as something that's out there without a series of causes, and there's no such thing out there that is so fixed that it will never be different. And this is often helpful for us because we get very attached to the idea that somehow obstacles will always be there, we can't fix anything, we can't change anything, and somehow there are absolutes, like there is such a thing as pure evil. And instead we begin to learn the relative sort of quality of life, and it becomes more workable because we suddenly realize, like, nope, there is nothing out there that isn't actually workable. There isn't anything out there that isn't able to be transformed because we recognize that all things come from something else. So there is conditions that create things, and we also realize that nothing is forever. And so we learn that this idea that if we, using Pema Chodron's experience, that if we just keep working on our relationship to difficulties and we keep moving forward, then we'll make progress. That the alternative, which is to sort of just lie down and sort of drown in the whole thing of life and the whole play of life, is not really possible or acceptable. But now we have to turn our attention to something else, which is the reason why we get stuck, which is ourselves. And so we're going to begin an exploration of lojong slogans called "Drive All Blames into One," or, as said by the grasshopper Hopper in Pixar's A Bug Life, first rule of leadership: everything is your fault. So we're going to begin to explore this idea of driving all blames into one, and continuing with our liver and gallbladder series. So to begin, though, let's get seated and grounded. Coming into that good seat of dignity, uprightness, and again, cultivating within that seat a kind of openness, a kind of dignity, so that instead of feeling like we're kind of an island, instead we're very receptive and open space. A strong sense of self, but no sense of impermeable boundary. There's some openness, some fluidity. And we connect to that, to the feeling of the legs and the uprightness of the spine and the internal sense of strength, without creating rigidity in the superficial external musculature of the pose. And then taking the hands to the hip crease for the opening bow, further strengthening the back and opening the heart, we slowly incline the body forward with regalness. Slowly come up. First preparatory pose, please, butterfly. Soles of the feet coming together. And allowing some openness in the hips so that there's not any deep pull, always searching for that dull ache rather than sharpness, and then starting to bring ourselves forward and down. And relaxing into the posture with gravity. So today in the main poses, we'll be adding by request a notification when we reach the last minute so that you can deepen or change the experience in your posture. But in the preparatory poses, we'll keep the focus on, in the 3 minutes, just beginning to relax into the 3 questions. First one being, am I here now? Always feeling free to change that first question, am I here now, into, do I want to be here now? And this question is helpful because it just reminds us of whether or not, for this moment, for right now, we're so challenged by our own experience that we are really prone today to want to distract ourselves. Not viewing that as a problem or a bad thing, but just being aware if today is a day where we're going to spend a lot of time trying not to experience ourselves in the pose. Butterfly pose, just feeling the pull in the hips, perhaps in the back as well. Head relaxed, and breath full and deep. And as usual, the 3 chimes, and on the 3rd one we come up. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And slowly coming up. Pausing. And then into the Sphinx pose, swinging around onto our abdomens. Finding the legs long behind us, and if we are working with back sensitivity today, feeling free to shift the elbows forward. And if the back is feeling supple, then the arms can straighten. Early in this practice, moving towards seal pose. The head relaxed and comfortably positioned. and attending to the second question, can I feel what's going on in my body? Again, we can ask the question, do I want to feel what's going on in my body? And seeing this question really as a way to inquire into our relative confidence and trust in the body. We can view our desire to not feel as a way to kind of escape a groundedness in the realities of being embodied, in being a kind of agent in the field of life. And in particular, if we hold some grudge against our body for either being a certain way, perhaps seeing it as failing us or limiting us, we can become very practiced and skillful in ignoring the real conditions of the body. In some cases, the sort of second version of the questions, do I want to, are a nice way to look at the practice and our practice in terms of our growing ability to face what is difficult, to look at our condition honestly, and to be courageous in facing and realizing our own challenges and situations. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And slowly coming out, pausing, and coming into the final posture, which is the twist. We keep the head oriented as it is, and coming onto the back, we bend the knees and bring the feet flat to the floor, and then dropping our knees to the collective left towards the stereo cabinet, the blankets, the entrance. We feel comfortable raising the right arm up. If we don't feel comfortable raising that arm up, we find some middle point or just keep it at the side. The top knee lifting away from the bottom if the twist is too intense, and the bottom ankle hooking on the outside of the top knee or thigh if we need more twist. The final question, can I relax, and do I want to relax? I've noticed for myself, and it may also be true for you, that there are definite times where I just do not want to calm down. You get that kind of, or I get that kind of righteous emotion or anger going, and rather than calming down, I just kind of want to keep throwing fire into the experience, adding fuel. So the desire to relax into emotion, into sensation in the body, again, a very courageous act, something worth paying attention to. Because if we are present and we feel what's going on in the body, and then we choose instead to kind of grasp in, claw into it, or try to claw ourselves away from it, then we're missing that critical final component, which is then to trust that leaning in, that experiencing, that feeling, that emotion, that experience will somehow not completely and totally overwhelm or damage us. I remember working with a student, and we were doing a particular yoga practice, and the postures that we were doing were focusing on really sort of bringing up and clearing out the emotion of anger. And the student said that if she tapped into that feeling, that it would never stop. And on the same token, if we try to tap into certain emotions like joy or happiness, we may say to ourselves, we don't really want to do that because then it'll be all the more awful when it ends. And so it's useful to note whether we are in the space where we can actually trust enough in the experience of our bodies and also the wisdom of impermanence and interdependence to ride that experience without grasping, to ride the experience of emotion without grasping. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And coming slowly back to center from your twist, as you untwist, feeling free to take any counter pose that feels appropriate. And then replanting the feet on the floor, we can take the knees to the other side, raising now our left arm up and feeling free to modulate the posture by either raising the top knee away from the bottom or by hooking the ankle of the bottom leg on the outside of the top leg. And as you settle into the twist, just taking a moment to, if you'd like, really tune into that willingness to touch into the body and to relax around the sensations that arise. Always reminding ourselves that this is a deeply courageous act. We may find it difficult sometimes to really view sitting with ourselves and feeling our bodies and our sensations and our emotions and not responding to them. You may find it hard to see that as courageous, but we might also reflect on how difficult that is, how much strength of presence it requires to really be non-reactive. And so I imagine that when people are choosing between, say, this class and April's class, then on a certain level there's a challenge between choosing whether you want to be really physically challenged or you want to be mentally challenged. As far as I've been able to tell, no one leaves this class exhausted on the physical level. But you may leave, depending upon your attentiveness to the practice, you may leave very introspective, very curious, and somewhat fatigued mentally, generating that courage over and over again. And remembering and reminding ourselves that this sequence of classes is about developing that quality of being the gifted general. And I'll just remind us of that in the first pose that we'll do, that teaching, and then introduce a little bit more about this drive all blames into one principle. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And slowly come back to center. Pause if you would, please. And stretch and release then. So the next posture that we've been working on has been Eye of the Needle pose. And this is the pose where we cross an ankle over the thigh and pull the leg in. And I've offered for us an alternative way, which is to actually straighten the leg and pull the leg down for those who have more flexibility. Today, if you'd like, I invite you to also add or take swan pose or pigeon pose if you find that Eye of the Needle is not generating enough of a dull ache to be useful for your body. But for the vast majority of people, Eye of the Needle is sufficient. So let's bring the right foot to the floor. So if you're taking swan or pigeon, then it's going to be your left leg that's going to be forward. So we take the left ankle over the right thigh. And we start there, and then grasping the back of the right thigh, we pull the leg into the body. Now, if you're on your back and you have enough flexibility to bring the thigh all the way to the chest, then that right leg will straighten and you'll pull down deepening the sensation here. If you're in swan pose or pigeon, then please lay forward, bringing the weight of your torso onto your forward thigh, thereby stimulating the gallbladder and liver channels more fully. So now please remember that at the 4-minute mark, I'll just give you an indication in case you wish to go a little bit deeper or to express the pose slightly differently in the last minute. I'll do that through a single chime. So, the quote that we've been using as our touchstone from Zongsar Jamyang Khyentse's book, What Makes You Not a Buddhist, is, by knowing that something is lying in wait for you just around the bend, by accepting that countless potentialities exist from this moment forward, you acquire the skill of pervasive awareness and foresight, like that of a gifted general, not paranoid, but prepared. So you might remember that we're trying to cultivate that quality of the gifted general. And our choice of physical practice for the month of September, the liver and gallbladder channel, is very much related to that theme. In his book, The Web That Has No Weaver, author Ted Kaptchuk states that the liver is most closely connected with the blood, and at the same time tempers and softens the ki. The liver is exquisitely sensitive to boundaries and demarcations and maintains the smoothness and harmony of movement throughout the body. The Nei Jing metaphorically calls the liver the general of an army because it ultimately embodies a refined assertiveness that is timely, skillful, and strategic and forceful, yet remains mobile and flexible. So the liver and its partner, the gallbladder, really seen as the general and captain of the army of the body, directing the energies of the body, as well as directing the mental attention out into the world. When balanced and strong, the liver and gallbladder channel manifest in skillful means and action. So just as Jamyang Khyentse notes, the harmony of the liver and gallbladder channel makes us prepared and not paranoid. To be aware and to have a kind of foresight. Again, just remembering that hearing a single chime indicates that we have about a minute left in the pose. This is new to class, so I will do a few reminders of this as we incorporate it into our standard practice. here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? So drawing yourself out of the pose you've chosen, taking a moment to stretch and release, whether it be from eye of the needle or from swan pose, however that expresses for you. And then taking your time to find the other side. So now if you're on your spine, then the right ankle is now on the left thigh, and if you're prone, downward facing, then the right shin bone is coming forward for swan or pigeon. Again, letting the body come down if you're in swan to more fully engage the inner line of the thigh where the liver channel runs, and to compress the gallbladder line against the floor. And if you're on your back, pulling in deeply so that the liver line is compressed and activated. And in both postures, helping to massage and activate the liver line as it runs into the core of the body. So there's a distinct difference in practice between the individual who knows the theory but hasn't sat with it, the person who sits without theory, and the person who combines both, the sitting and the theory and the self-witnessing. So we're working on being a little bit of that third person, the most courageous version. Why we in the Shambhala tradition call the art of being human becoming a warrior. So let's begin with the proposition that being a general in our life, being a ruler in our life, is about understanding that all of our experience is our responsibility. And that we take this wisdom with neither the intention of making ourselves victims nor making ourselves dictators, but instead fully opening ourselves to experiencing our lives and life around us as it is, and to develop a kind of courage without a superhero complex. So, throughout practice today, really looking at, contemplating, and attending to our attitude and focus when it comes to seeing ourselves as the general or ruler of our own life. My last 4-minute chime was not as skillful as I would have liked it to be. So what I'll try to do this time, which will be the general mark, is you'll hear the chime and it'll sort of be immediately silenced as opposed to resonating. It's a bit better. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? And slowly coming out. If you're on your back, of course, stretching out, taking advantage of the position perhaps to fully stretch the body on the floor. And if you're in pigeon pose, then perhaps stretching up into downward dog and then forward onto your belly. And as a collective, we will come together on the abdomen for Sphinx or seal pose. So coming onto the abdomen, either rolling over or simply laying down, and recalling that seal pose, which is the kind of yin cobra. We turn the fingertips out here to open the chest so that the shoulders are open. The palms facing forward is, of course, an option, but turning the palms out tends to externally rotate the arms and thereby allow the chest to open more. It is not required to be in seal pose. We can be in Sphinx pose. And we can choose to roll up the blanket here if we're using one to heighten or raise the elbows here, which will create more bend in the spine. So there are many ways to enter this experience of the back bend, depending upon our bodies. So finding our back bend. So in becoming this general and focusing on this drive all blames into one, Shambhala's founder, Trungpa Rinpoche, has the following to say about this particular slogan. Even though somebody else has made a terrible boo-boo and blamed it on you, you should take the blame yourself. You might pause for a moment and notice any initial reaction to this phrase. Whenever you're hearing a quote, it can be good to kind of note what gets you riled. This gets me riled. Even though somebody else has made a terrible boo-boo and blamed it on you, you should take the blame yourself. Depending upon your background, that may be very troubling. he goes on to say, in terms of power, it is a much simpler and more direct way of controlling the situation. In addition, it is the most direct way of simplifying complicated neuroses into one point. So what might it mean, or how do you relate to this principle of taking responsibility or taking the blame yourself? And what arises in the face of that particular teaching or call? When someone else has made a terrible boo-boo and blamed it on you, that you should take the blame yourself. Much like we did in the first classes related to the first lojong slogan, from where arises your reaction to that particular teaching? You might notice that when someone says taking the blame yourself for others' mistakes, that you get nodded in the shoulders, or it causes a certain memory to arise, or you tense your face and jaw, or your stomach begins to churn. And this is where, even as you're testing the teachings and experience them, and your stomach is nodding and an unpleasant memory arises, the three questions become critical. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation and slowly coming down? Remembering as you rest and rebalance from the Sphinx pose that the whole purpose of this class and this space is that there is nothing out there right now that means you any harm or anything realistically that can happen to you. So in some ways, this is a very safe and hermetically sealed laboratory for working with our reactions so as to develop skillful means to be used out in our daily lives. Now, please, let's press up to seated and work our way into shoelace pose, aka cow's face. So starting from a seated posture, we'll snake the left heel under the right leg and towards the right hip or buttock. And then taking our right leg and drawing it over, we work towards stacking the knees and settling the heels at each hip. As we settle into this posture, noticing the differences in our ability to express this pose based on our own physical form. And not being concerned about that, just finding as much as we can the stack of the legs, the uprightness of the spine, and then, if you'd like to, begin to direct the weight of your body slightly forward and down. Feeling free to settle the hands on the floor or the legs, or keep them resting on the knees, out to the sides. Whatever feels best as you provide the pressure onto the legs that will stimulate the liver and gallbladder channels. So taking the blame yourself. Trungpa Rinpoche in this passage refers to neurosis, and that is a very close analog to this idea that Jamyang Khyentse brings up, which is that kind of paranoia. This feeling state of the world is out to get me. It's perhaps important to mention that this teaching is not implying that taking the blame is a step one takes without first having done some of the self-examination and lucid, or creating lucid self-awareness to take the blame without creating neurosis or paranoia in ourselves. So simply put, this teaching is not intended to be done in a vacuum without other practices surrounding it. This is partially why in our, what I would call post-tantric yoga world, what I mean by that is that you can't swing the proverbial yoga strap or block without hitting some reference to chakras or enlightenment. That idea of post-tantric. In the post-tantric yoga world, we have tended to focus on the esoteric and extreme spiritual practices without building the foundation or the anchor. So we're all about opening and balancing our chakras while still fundamentally being assholes to each other. But my third eye is fully open. So we've done this sort of, we've put the cart before the horse, as it were. So while we're trying to say, does the cart really exist? Right? And trying to work on our spiritual selves, we nevertheless have really not embodied the teachings of consistent self-awareness and, in a kind of way, a self-responsibility, that being the general of our world is developing a great deal of courage, self-control, and self-awareness. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? So you come up and out. You pause, perhaps unwind the legs as you let the hips socket open again, the knees open, feeling that arising of kind of blood flow back through the legs and into the torso. And then for the other side, again, beginning by snaking your right heel over to your left hip, and then taking the left leg up and over, finding whatever degree of knee stacking you can find, not being troubled by the left hip perhaps slightly lifting off, and then choosing, if you'd like to shift the weight forward to deepen the sensation in the pose. Finding cow's face or shoelace pose. So if we've done the groundwork, as it were, then when we come to the questions of taking, quote unquote, the blame yourself, we're taking that from the perspective of already having developed some groundedness in your own courage, self-awareness, and self-humor. You're doing it within the context of having a little bit clear sense of yourself. And because of that, perhaps having developed the first stages of actual compassion, which I define in these classes not as a feeling, but rather as a set of actions that may be accompanied by feeling. So what does that mean? One perhaps beneficial side effect of a practice of self-awareness is that you begin to appreciate your own neuroses and suffering as really very common. That you are not the only one that feels this way. And you begin to develop an appreciation for the tools that you have developed to be able to notice this, to not be driven by automatic pilot. And so you start to develop some compassion, which is the extension of your own developed self-awareness towards others, seeing others in the same way that you've developed an awareness of yourself. Saying that again, so that when we've spent some time really noticing ourselves, whether it's through the 3 questions or through some other set of practices, you begin to really come into courageous contact with your own paranoia and neurosis. And as that courage grows, you can begin to extend that awareness to other people. So you begin to see that these fears and doubts and issues within yourself are mirrored in those around you. And as you continue to notice that, you start to develop this sense of, and this power to be able to extend your awareness to those other people and to begin accepting the neuroses and paranoia of other people. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? So please slowly come up, straightening out the legs, opening up the chest a bit. And turning for the last pose, which is going to be a dragonfly. Let's turn towards the pond. Say what? Did someone just moan? Did I miss something? Dragonfly, which is turning towards the pond. We're going to open the legs wide. And bending the knees, perhaps, if we have a little too much tension there, we'll begin to draw ourselves forward and down. Deeply stretching the inner thighs, back of the legs, and also, for most of us, getting some compression in the torso. So in her book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown, who has become more and more a household name on the questions of vulnerability and compassion, says the following about narcissism. We need to understand these trends and influences, but I find it far more helpful and even transformative in many instances to look at the patterns of behavior through the lens of vulnerability. For example, when I look at narcissism through the vulnerability lens, I see the shame-based fear of being ordinary. I see the fear of never feeling extraordinary enough to be noticed, to be lovable, to belong, or to cultivate a sense of purpose. So in speaking to that quality, Brené Brown highlights one particular reason why people never really become the generals, the rulers of their own lives. Because becoming so really requires you to risk first discovering that you are not as extraordinary as you think you are, and second, that there is, in many, sometimes not all, but in many cases, choices. When we become the general of our lives, we can no longer resort to being small, being out of control, being separate somehow from the texture and nuances of our own lives and the lives around us. I've had the good fortune to know some very successful people in business. And there's not one of them that I've met that do not, on some days of the week, wake up and stare in the mirror and think to themselves, today everyone's going to figure out that I'm a fraud. So the ability to be the general in our own lives is really dependent on our own capacity to really face what Brené Brown lists as the fear of being ordinary. The fear of never being extraordinary or thinking that being extraordinary is the requisite quality to be noticed or valued, to be given a place at the table, to have purpose. Am I here now? Can I feel what's going on in my body? Can I relax around that sensation? As you slowly come up and out of the straddle splits or dragonfly pose, if you've rotated, you can find yourself coming back to center. And if you've stayed at center, then drawing the legs together now. And as we've been doing, the end of each practice of the liver and gallbladder channel, we'll come down to our backs with a blanket or eye covering prepared to rest on the spine with the eyes covered. And if you'd like today, taking your feet wide and dropping the knees in so as to create a support for the low spine as well as to perhaps counterbalance the hips after the width created by dragonfly pose. Taking this both as our final relaxation and our last posture. So there will be no chime for this particular one, nor is there a mandate that you stay supine. You may choose to eventually roll onto your side or even onto your abdomen, but the pressure on the eyes is intended to bring the practice up into the full line of the gallbladder channel, which terminates in and around the eye. So, in the first 6 classes of this sequence and this view of point 3, transformation of bad or evil circumstance into the fuel for enlightenment, we tried to develop a sense that life is workable, to generate the theoretical knowledge that, based on experience, that there is nothing that is really totally permanent, and there is nothing that isn't dependent upon something else to be. That all things arise from other things, and all things are subject to impermanence, to being dissolved and swept away. Perhaps having a glimpse of that or beginning to develop a sense that might be true, we now turn the attention to our own ability to take advantage of that teaching of what Thich Nhat Hanh calls inter-arness, and the fundamental teaching of impermanence, which is a teaching that arises and can arise very naturally from a awareness of the 3 questions. That nothing in your body, in your experience, is not changing, not evolving or flowing. So we turn that attention now inwards for the next stage, which is to inquire, to test, in some senses, our ability to generate courage enough to be ordinary, to be courageous enough to face our neurosis, and to see its history and its impermanence. And then maybe in a few classes from now, or a few years from now, or a few lifetimes from now, beginning to find that self-awareness extending out to others. That initially might be an aspiration, and then it might shift towards practice, and then it may shift towards a component of the way we view the world on a more consistent basis. You might begin to take the next few moments to begin to awaken the body and prepare it for movement. And if you've covered the eyes to complete the practice, then when you're ready, uncovering them. And perhaps beginning to move back to seated. And as we come back collectively to seated, reestablishing that dignity in our seat. Finding the posture not one of rigidity in response to the world, but stability and flexibility in response to the world and ourselves. Can embody groundedness, yet still exhibit some compassion. And then taking the hands to the hip crease for the closing bow. Again, the aspiration, which has some context based on this class, and then on the third, we bow. May I experience happiness in the root of happiness. May you experience happiness in the root of happiness. May all beings everywhere experience happiness and the root of happiness. Namaste. So thank you everyone for a wonderful class. Welcome to our second lojong slogan for this series. If you're staying for Reiki Restorative, it will be next door. If you're staying for Radiant Energy Arts, we'll be in here. And if you're not staying at all, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday and a great week. Thank you.